The storm comes quick and hard, a wall of black cloud rolling off the gulf that turns the sea into a flat sheet of light. Thunder hits like a drum, and the city lights blink out. Kofi Mensah runs from the black SUV down the slick steps of the Accra business tower, his polished shoes slapping wet stone, his suit soaked at the hems. His breath makes white clouds in the cold rain even though the air is warm. People shout and umbrellas flip inside out. A brass key dangles from his hand on a thin leather string, warm from the worn groove where his thumb has rubbed it for years. It is a small thing, heavy with memory. His mother gave it to him when he left the old house in Kasoa, and he keeps it in his pocket like a rebuke. Lightning splits the sky. In the gutter under a sheet of blue plastic, a woman huddles, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and bright, her small hands cupped around a steaming tin cup. Someone shouts where she is, and a guard moves forward with a hard face, radio crackling. Kofi glances down at the key, then at the woman. The brass stings in his palm like a choice offered. He drops the key into his palm, reaches, and without thinking pulls the plastic away to offer shelter in the face of the storm. When Kofi crouches in the rain, the crowd breathes in like a thing that holds itself. The woman does not flinch at his suit or the damp smell of expensive cologne. She pulls back her hair and smiles with a tiny, tired flash. Her name is Amina. The name sounds like a bell, small and clear. Her teeth are uneven. She has a thin scarf with holes and a Bible with dog-eared pages under the plastic sheet. Kofi's security team bristles, fingers on earpieces, but he waves them off with the brass key still wrapped in his fingers. Cameras flash from a distance. A businessman is always a picture. And someone shouts, "Mr. Mensah, back to the car!" But he moves the plaza, tick over both of them, and takes her steaming cup. The rain makes the street into a mirror. His face in it looks strange, like someone else's. A dog wanders by and sniffs the puddles. A bitter smell of cooking oil from a nearby food stall drifts past. Kofi asks in a low voice, "Are you all right?" Amina says, "I am cold." She does not ask for money. The key in his hand feels like a coin of decision. He decides to stay. That decision starts a ripple. A video of Kofi holding Amina's plastic calls the cameras in. A man with a phone records the scene and posts it. Within hours, the clip runs on small screens. The morning news puts the short, soggy clip on repeat. Kofi Mensah, the man who owns towers on the skyline and cranes on the outskirts, becomes kind in public for 60 seconds. His PR team wants the clip used, wants a carefully framed statement about compassion. Kofi, who has built schools from contracts and parks for press openings, wants something different. Amina's eyes carry a calm that is not surprised by him. She speaks of a tent that used to be a home for 30 families before the bulldozers came. She names a street he recognizes, Old Tema Road, and tells him the council sent papers and men in boots, and that night the rains came and the people left. Kofi hears a name he knows. The address is on land his company sold to a development fund last year. He frowns like someone who finds a scratch on a finished floor. The brass key weaves in his fingers. He tries to balance the story like a scale. Obstacle hits like a new thunderclap. His board wants him to keep the moment tidy, to donate 500,000 CDs and take a photograph under umbrellas. The business press smells a new charity headline and writes bullet points. But the people in the tents on Old Tema Road do not want one-time money. They want roofs and rights. Sefu Okoro, the rival developer who wins demolition bids with the mayor, hears the video and smiles because Kofi is mostly show and the city is mostly deals. Sefu moves a pile of men to the area to keep the council quiet and to ignore human faces. His men are sharp with clips, their shoes clean. Kofi feels pressure from clients in Lagos and Nairobi who like the name Mensah to mean power without trouble. He is pulled right and left at boardrooms filled with glass and the smell of coffee, and in the evenings he walks the streets with the brass key in his hand and thinks of the huddled plastic and the line of children whose shoes leak. Kofi makes a choice that looks like a gentle middle. He funds a small clinic and hires a team to hand out blankets and hot soup. Amina works with the volunteers who come. She is steady, firm with children, and coy with charity. The small clinic has bright posters and a banner with Kofi Mensah's name written cleanly across the top. But the road to Old Tema is a road with barbed decision and louder obstacles. A judge delays new housing permits. Machines back up at the port. A journalist from Accra Gazette smells a headline and asks if this is a PR stunt to cover the way his company built its towers on the city's hunger. Kofi sees the headline and his stomach tightens. He is a man who can pay to smother a story. But Amina has a way of sitting by the clinic door and looking at him like a ledger that cannot be bought. "You can do more," she says, the night chicks sing out. And the rain is a lighter sound. "Buy them a home." He laughs once, a short dry sound, but the brass key in his hand is suddenly heavy, like a piece of metal that remembers its shape. The next obstacle is the community voice, rising and raw. People whose houses were promised flats are tired of promises. They stage a small protest outside a construction site where Kofi's contractors have stopped work waiting for a permit. Their voices are not polished. They use drums and old pots. A video goes viral showing police pushing a woman who is 70 into a gutter. Kofi watches his phone while his driver watches the street. He is torn between keeping shares that fund scholarships and giving those shares to build houses. Seifu arranges a property hearing and slips in a clause that lets the developer seize more land while a complex law cycle grinds. Kofi's lawyers advise him to fight in private, to take the win and ease the people quietly. The brass key keeps moving in his pocket like a heart. The crowd outside his office swells and a man with a broken wrist yells into a megaphone, his voice thin and raw. The pressure becomes a physical thing that sits on Kofi's chest at night. Kofi's private life becomes an obstacle that cracks like ice. His sister Ajoa, who runs their father's foundation with calm and stern notes, tells him that giving a headline is not enough. "You forget, Kofi," she says. "This city is our people." She lays out old photographs of their mother standing in front of a mud house with a painted door, a small boy with a wooden toy. Their mother is not alive to see the choices. Ajoa wants him to sign a paper that would bring the money and the plans directly to the families instead of through the board. The board will call her naive. He looks at the brass key then, at how small it looks next to the pile of papers with numbers that shine like coins. Inside him a different thing moves, a memory of the old house door and his mother pressing the key into his palm. He hears thunder on the roof of the downtown tower. He writes his name on a blank sheet. Midpoint comes with a twist that feels like winter in summer. Amina sits in the clinic with a woman who is coughing, a man with a burned hand, and a small boy who hums under his breath. She tells Kofi a story in the kitchen between bandages and the clatter of cups. She says her name is not just Amina. It is Amina Dlamini, and she once ran a small cooperative in the very place his empire now towers over. She speaks of nights when friends came to sleep on her floor, and of a marriage where the husband left with debt and left her with the care of children. She says, "I signed papers too once." The words take Kofi's breath. Amina pulls from her scarf a photograph creased in the middle. A younger Kofi, thin-cheeked, at a church feast, and a woman next to him with a girl on her knee. Kofi stares at the picture. The girl is his cousin. The woman is a friend of the family who taught him to read when he was 6. Amina is the woman who once kept his little brother's shoes under her bed because there was no place else to keep them. He did not know then that the boy would grow up and be the man who built towers. The twist breaks the easy frame. The woman in front of him is not a stranger. She is part of his roots, a thread he forgot when he stitched his life of glass and steel. Everything flips. The brass key burns in Kofi's hand like a brand. He asks why she left the house, and Amina's eyes go a different color under the clinic light. She tells him of the night the bulldozers came, not because of an anonymous developer, but because the company that bought the land used a forged title. A man in a suit paid a council clerk with envelopes. A name he knows, Seifu Okoro, is in the paper trail. Kofi sits like a man who has been shown a mirror that holds a bruise and a name. He realizes the ease of his life sits on many small broken things: forged papers, quiet bribes, people who did not have a voice. The decision is no longer about charity, it is about truth. The brass key becomes a symbol of a door he must open or leave closed. Amina says simply, "You can fix this." Her voice is not cruel. It is a truth passively held like a bowl that will overflow. Rather than cover the problem, Kofi chooses a fight that moves like a storm surge. He asks his legal team to look into titles, and one by one they find small papers stamped with the wrong seal. The obstacles multiply. Seifu has lawyers and a judge who takes his calls, and the press prints smears that make Kofi's name look like a man who wants attention. Kofi's bank loans tremble under the weight of legal fees that surge like tide. The company's stock dips, and clients in Cape Town quiet their calls, and a donor suggests a different tack: settle and move on. Kofi refuses to settle quietly. He steps into public spaces with the brass key visible on his jacket chain, and he stands at a microphone outside the city hall where the crowd is thick like wet cloth. He promises a full audit and an open list of those who need housing. He promises a public trust. The crowd roars and a new obstacle rises: a smear campaign aimed at his sister and at small women who run food stalls, as if their own lives are part of a drama. Seifu is careful, slow, a shark behind glass. Then the crisis strikes like a blow that takes the breath out of everyone. The night the city tears down a small line of shacks near Old Tima Road, men in blue uniforms arrive before dawn. They throw a rope over a woman's roof and laugh. An incendiary lamp knocks over a stove. One tent catches. There is screaming, and someone runs with a child in their arms, the child's head slumped. Kofi, pinned by a meeting, hears the call on his phone and drives out in a rain that has no mercy. At the site, the flame eats at plastic and wood. Amina is there, pulling children from the smoke, her eyes wide and black. When the ambulance comes, it is late. A small boy in a red sweater who called Amina Auntie dies on the pavement, steam rising from his wet hair. The crowd is a reed of grief. Someone throws a bottle. Kofi stands like a rock. The brass key in his hand is useless now next to a child gone. He collapses, not on the pavement, but into the hard knowledge that his hesitation allowed a life to end. The painful loss is clean and hot in his chest. Amina holds him for a moment and says, "It takes more than words." The hard choice that waits becomes a blade: keep his company and fight Seifu legally over decades, or give his control to the trust and force change now, but risk his fortune and everything he has built. Kofi makes the hard choice that looks like a ruin and a repair. He calls a press conference and tells them he will sign over his controlling share in Mensah Holdings to a public trust that will build housing for the displaced. The board screams. Investors grumble about fiduciary duty. Seifu smiles as if watching a man fall into a hole he dug. The city frets, and the stock market makes a small, cruel noise. But Kofi steps up onto the stage under floodlights that make him look small and human. Microphones clench at him like hungry insects. He tells the camera a simple sentence: "I was wrong." He places his brass key on the table and slides it across like an offering, a small metal sun against the wood. The reporters barely breathe. An unexpected witness, a young street vendor named Yemi, who had filmed the bulldozer payment months earlier, stands and points to a clip on his phone where Sefu takes an envelope in a shadowed car park. The clip had gone unseen in the noise before. Now it runs in the room on a laptop that someone sets down like a stone. The face of Sefu, his fingers on the envelope, is a stain that will not wash away. People gasp. The rush of witnesses grows like a river. Public reveal becomes a spectacle the city talks about for weeks. Live streams show the clip and then show sworn testimony from clerks who once took instructions from Sefu. A judge hears the case and a warrant is issued. Sefu's sharp shoes echo in a courtroom where sunlight falls like judgment. He is stripped of his contracts and held on charges of fraud and bribery. His men fold like dark cards. Kofi testifies in public about titles and about the stalls where boys had once eaten spiced yams and laughed at pigeons. Amina sits in the front row, her scarf neat and her hands folded, the same woman who once kept his brother's shoes. When Kofi signs the trust papers in front of cameras, the brass key is placed inside a carved wooden box that becomes the trust's symbol. He signs not with the swagger of a man who owns, but with the hand of someone who knows that paper must mean rescue now. The crowd outside the courthouse breaks into a song that is part freedom and part sorrow, and the city seems to tilt a little toward repair. There are more obstacles after the reveal, smaller but steady as rain. The trust's first building falls behind schedule when foundation work unearthed a sinkhole filled with old pipes and broken brick. The contractors demand more money. Bureaucrats shuffle papers. An old prostitute who runs a tea stall outside the new project claims the site belongs to her family by right. Kofi sits in a small meeting room with blue chairs and the brass key in his palm, which is raw from the grip. He works like a man with a map in his hands, tracing routes of old families, talking to elders, bringing in engineers from Kampala and masons from Kumasi. He sleeps in small rooms near the site and learns how to mix cement and how to read a foundation plan. The trust hires Amina as a community leader. She knows the names and the stories and the small grief that has no headline. Her job is to bring people who once lived in plastic into the new houses with a dignity that is real and practical. Keys, contracts, and a small garden. Kofi watches her from a distance at first, then sits beside her on a low wall while workers lift a beam like a giant breathing animal. Multiclimax continues with a public spectacle that is not empty. On the day the first building opens, the city trolls and newspapers and rival developers show up like flies. The press is a mix of snark and wonder. A line of families stands waiting, their faces like weathered art. Children tug at small fists, and a little boy with a missing tooth holds the brass key in his hand like a trophy. Sefu, disgraced and stripped of power, sits in a court cell and watches a news feed of the opening on a small, cracked screen. An unexpected witness, the little girl who had been given birthday cake in the old cooperative years ago and who is now a reporter, reads a list of names of those who are moving into the new building. She asks a question. On live that cuts the room. Who gets to be called a citizen? People laugh and sob at once. Kofi walks down the rows, hands sweating inside his pockets. He watches as a woman who once stood on a corner selling sweets unlocks a door with the brass key and steps into an apartment that has a real window and real paint. The sound is small, a little child's gasp at a bathtub filled with clean water. Amina finds her apartment near the roof where the wind brings sea smells and the city sounds mixed like music. She plants a small basil in a tin can and names it for the boy in the red sweater. The trust runs workshops where people learn to manage their leases and to plant gardens. Ajoa helps build a scholarship fund for children displaced by the demolitions. Kofi sits on a bench and watches families move boxes in like migrating birds. He feels the brass key heavy in his pocket, and he often takes it out and rubs it between his thumb and forefinger. The key sits sometimes on the trust office desk like a son. People ask if he regrets what he gave up. He does not answer with a long speech. He looks at Amina and at the child who has a new pair of shoes, and he feels as if something lost has been returned. He hears the echo of a prayer his mother used to say, and then he hears a new sound, laughter from a kitchen. 6 months wash past like new paint drying in the sun. The trust completes 3 small buildings. The city court convicts a ring of clerks who had sold titles, and Seifu awaits sentencing. The community learns how to hold meetings and how to lay minutes out on paper so no man with money can erase them. Amina grows a garden on the roof and teaches children to plant seeds. Kofi often comes early in the morning and sits with a glass of tea on a plastic chair that smells faintly of glue and paint. He no longer wears the gold watch he once liked. He has a small rope bracelet Amina made for him, threaded with a wooden bead. The brass key is in a place of honor in the trust office, displayed in a clear box on a shelf that children point to like a relic. The city still has work to do. There are still people who sleep at bus stations, but the echo of this change moves in a slow drum. Rumors of new development deals with better community covenant clauses spread. The skyline remains, but now each tower seems to cast a shadow that somebody is counting. On a soft morning when the sea is a sheet of silver, Kofi walks with Amina along the new garden path where little signs mark the names of families who moved in. The air smells like basil and smoke from a neighboring vendor frying plantain. Children chase a ball that slaps the concrete, and a woman in a bright dress sings as she sweeps her doorstep. Kofi carries the brass key in his pocket, but sometimes reaches and touches the wooden bead on the bracelet Amina made. He tells her about his mother and the house in Kasoa, and about the first time he left, and how his mother pressed the key into his palm. Amina listens, and then tells a story of a night when the church lights went out and men sang under the candles. Their voices are low and careful, like people who have good reason to be grateful. Amina says she is not done. There are more oofs to fix. More children who need real shoes. Kofi nods. This work is not a single act of mercy. It is a life of repair, and he is ready to live it. The brass key finally feels like a tool and not a weight. On a day when the sun burns gold across the city, the Trust opens its first community center named the Key House. The building has a door with a large brass motif shaped like the little key that started it all. People stream inside for classes, food, and stories. Amina stands at the threshold like a person who has been guarding a secret and then offers it. Children paint murals with bright hands, painting the skyline beside small houses. Kofi watches and finds that he is proud in a new way, not of towers, but of thresholds. Outside, a young couple who lived in the tents at Old Tama Road unlocks a new door, and the man cries like someone who did not know he would see such a day. The city paper prints a long piece about the change and calls it a rare thing, power used to make room for the poor. Seifu's name appears in the column a few pages back with a small report on his sentence. 6 months later, the change is not finished, but something is different. Kofi's life is quieter. He spends mornings at the Trust and afternoons at meetings where he listens more than he speaks. Amina runs the community kitchen and the children's theater, where the small with big mouths tell stories that are full and loud. The brass key hangs on a ribbon above the door of the key house, and when people ask why, Amina says, "It is a reminder that some doors are not for the rich alone." Kofi nods at that and thinks of his mother and of the small boy who died, and of the man in a suit who once thought titles were paper to be stamped and sold. He remembers the line of tents and the smell of cooking oil that once made a city street into a kitchen for survival. He does not think he saved the world. He thinks he made room in it. Moral. True wealth is not what you hold, but what you open for others. Did you think their choice was brave? Yes or no? If this story touched your heart, subscribe, share, and join our warm, caring community to listen and help turn small choices into big change. Morning spills over the key house as the first light finds the glass walls and the chorus of city sounds climbs higher, the Danfo horns, a vendor shouting plantains, the distant hum of generators, and the soft shuffle of families bringing in boxes, all turning the place into a waking creature. Kofi and Amina stand side by side on the new garden path, the brass key resting in a carved wooden box on the desk inside where children press their pale forefingers to the glass to trace its shape. And as they watch, a tall man in a charcoal suit steps onto the plaza with a measured calm that makes the crowd part like a river, followed by a small entourage. Not noisy spectacle, but purpose. And the man raises his hand as though greeting an old friend and says in a voice that sounds like a drum being tapped lightly, "I am Kwesi Atta, founder of the Crescent Foundation, a private fund that has quietly steered this project from behind the scenes, and today I step into the light because a city that gave us a chance must now hold itself to account." The crowd breathes, and the rain-washed air tastes of basil and smoke from stalls and possibility, and Kofi feels the weight of the brass key in his pocket shift like a new decision pressing from within, because Atta's arrival is not a headline but a hinge, a signal that the wealth gap has a voice that can be heard when a poor, hopeful, and a former political shadow meet a billionaire who wants to make room, not claim it. And the unknown donor's eyes sweep the crowd until they land on Amina with a quiet nod that seems to say, "This is not charity, but covenant. This is a city learning to call home its most fragile citizens." Atta steps to the podium, the press cameras clicking in quick-fire rhythm, and his first words are simple and careful. "We did not build this to shine a single day, but to prove a pattern can change, to prove that a city can set a table large enough for all," and then he names the numbers not as figures but as people. The families who slept under blue tarps on Old Tama Road, the girl who sold fruits and learned to count through the numbers of a city budget, the boy who cried when his mother's stove blew out, and a little girl who learned to read on a bench with a cracked spine, because the audience knows who those people are and because the money behind this moment has a trail and a memory. And when Atta concludes with a pledge to restructure the trust so that every new project carries a binding covenant with the people, Ajoa, seated in the back row with a calm face that could be mistaken for indifference, glances toward Kofi with a small, surprised smile that says, "The family is watching and the family is listening." And the room begins to glow with the glow of accountability rather than spectacle. Atta's revelation, his foundation's private funds, matched Kofi's shared investment, and that the Crescent Foundation once walked a similar street of broken promises in another quarter of the city, lands like rain on a heat-dried pavement, and the crowd loosens its grip on fear and takes a breath together, a single moment of truth that tastes of salt and rain and forgiveness. And Amina's hands, steady as always, unfold a small diagram on the table that shows how the first 3 blocks will be tied to a public budget line, and how every new home will have a lease that grants long-term occupancy rights, not an empty promise. The cameras flare to life again, and the reporters bumble into questions about shadow donors and hidden agendas. But Atta answers with a smile that is neither naive nor empty. "I choose to be present, not to own." And when journalists press for his personal stake, he gestures toward the crowd and says, "My wealth is a tool here, but the real wealth is the trust of the people." The phrase "set" less like a seed in the room and begins to sprout into a chorus of quiet voices from the back rows, praising not the new money, but the new commitment. And Kofi, who has spent nights with the brass key, pressed to his lips as if he could taste decision, feels a crack open inside him. A door not to escape but to step through, and Atta's message rings through the hall in its own simple rhythm. This is a partnership of obligations, not a solo act of generosity, and a billionaire's presence here, visible and accountable, makes the city's wealth gap conversation public, concrete and safe for a whole new generation. Still, the interval's tension lingers because the man's public reveal also surfaces. An old truth Kofi has learned to fear and love in equal measure. Power, even when it wears a benevolent face, still treats time as a commodity and people as statistics. And so the moment is both balm and warning, a sign that the door to the future can be opened only if the room holds steady against the next gust of noise. As Ada finishes, the key house doors swing wider, and a chorus of mothers, teachers, and teenage volunteers step through with lists of urgent needs: more washrooms in the new blocks, a school bus route for the kids who live farthest away, a clinic schedule that matches shift workers' hours, while Amina moves through the crowd like a river guiding small boats to shore, listening in turn to each fear and hope with the soft authority of someone who knows how to turn a rumor into a plan. And Kofi, now with his pocket emptied of fear and the brass key warming again against his chest, feels the first real test of his new vow looming on the horizon, a new district over in Adenta, where a second wave of demolitions threatened to erase another group of families before they could unpack their first boxes. And Atta himself hints at a second phase of funding that would allow the trust to purchase land rather than just lease buildings, a detail that makes the crowd murmur with a cautious joy, and makes Seifu's ghost seem smaller in the room. And the watchers in the corner, those quiet financiers who always count the numbers before they count the people, tilt their heads with a new kind of respect because this is not a show of money, but a display of a different currency, trust earned day by day in the work of planning, explaining, and delivering. But the interval's twist comes not from Atta's entrance alone, but from the way a group of young community organizers step forward with a folded map and a simple demand to hear the voices of those who slept in tents, to let them draw the path of their own neighborhoods, to guarantee at least one meeting per month where residents lay out their needs and their rights on a shared table, to ensure the trust's ongoing funds are governed by people who look like the streets they serve, not by distant boards who never learned a name for hunger. The crow? UD roars not with the triumph of an overnight cure, but with the resolve of a long road, and Kofi catches that tremor in the room and knows the road forward is not about shrinking the space between dollars and doors, but about widening that space so that a grandmother who braids herbs on her porch can say she lives under a roof she helped decide, and a child with shoes that don't leak can run toward a future that doesn't forget where she came from. Atta, watching from the dais, allows this moment to stretch, then leans toward Kofi and says softly, "There will be more doors, but every door must be earned and shared." And Kofi nods, touches the wooden bead at his wrist, and for a heartbeat the brass key feels like a real tool again, a steady guide in a city that has learned to measure wealth not by height of towers, but by how evenly the light from the windows falls on a neighborhood square. The day closes with a gentle wheeze of generators, the scent of roasted plantain mingling with new paint, and a mural being sketched on the wall of the key house so that the city can name every door it opens, not just the good ones. The old thread about forged titles is not forgotten, but now belongs to a case file in a courtroom far away, while a newer thread confirms what the interval begets: a billionaire witness who chose to stand in the light so that the people's face could be seen in the ledger, a community that has learned to bargain for its own future, and a leadership pair who have learned that power's real test is generosity that lasts. And as the sun sinks into a horizon that glows like a coin turned on its edge, the last beat of the scene lands in a single, quiet truth that feels almost like a blessing and almost like a dare. If wealth chooses to open doors, then the people will fill the halls with their voices and their votes, and the doors will not stay shut again. The camera. A pulls back to show the key house standing bright against the evening, the crowd thinning into small clusters of revitalized faces, Amina beside Kofi with her basil plant on the railing, the wooden box with the key resting on the desk, and Atta's foundation emblem catching a last glint of sun before night. And the city, at last, seems to breathe, as if it has learned to live inside a new kind of map, where every door is labeled with a name, ours.